Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So today I am giving you 30 book recommendations. These are 30 of some of my favorite books of all time. I literally sat down and I thought of like every 5-star book that I've read, and then I picked like the top 30. Listen, I've read a lot of books, okay? But I am turning 30 in October. I turn 30 on October 26th. So I decided, actually was requested to do this video. Someone was like, can you just like give us your 30 favorite books since you're turning 30? And I was like, okay. If I'm turning 30, I might as well like do something good for the world, you know? So, you know, at least something good can come out of me becoming old. So, not that 30 is old, but like, I just feel like I'm getting old. Like my body is getting old. So, anyways, so these are my top 30 book recommendations, all different genres. Obviously, most are going to be horror, extreme horror, thriller, that sort of thing, but I'm just going to go in no particular order. I feel like if you've been here a while, you can pretty much name my top 10 favorite books because I don't shut up about them ever. So we're just gonna get started. So I am not pulling out my physical books for this. I am just going to curse myself later when I have to edit this video. I just hate like pulling books off the shelves and then having to put them back. Anyways, my favorite book, Brother by Anya Alborn. Raise your hand if you've ever been personally victimized by me to read this book. Okay, this book is a general horror book about this family that tortures and murders women, and they eat them, they're cannibals, and we are following our main character Michael, who does not agree with the things that his family does, and he's having some moral dilemmas. It's not super graphic, like it's not extreme horror or anything, but it is very bleak, depressing, and disturbing, and I just absolutely love this one so much. And then my next favorite book, obviously is no surprise, it's Survivor by J.F. Gonzalez. Before you go spending $200, $300 on this book, it is coming back in print in October. The author passed away and his books are slowly being reprinted, but Brian Keene is re-releasing this in October. So Survivor is an extreme horror book, and we are following this woman and her husband. They are on this road trip and they get separated, and this man kidnaps our female main character and tells her that she is going to be the star of his snuff films. This is following the snuff film industry and the horrible, vile people that film these films, and they tell her that she's going to be the new star, but she has to do some things and there's some moral dilemmas along the way. There is like part of the book, it ends up kind of turning into like a thriller the second half. There's a little bit of like comedic relief thrown in there. It's a wild one, but check trigger warnings. It is messed up. This is the first extreme horror book I ever read, so it made me fall in love with extreme horror. It has a special place in my heart and I'm obsessed. Next is Them by McKay Watson. This one is another extreme horror, and you are following this woman and she gets a warning on her TV, and the town is in an uproar. People are being murdered by people that they love, but turns out it's not actually them. It's just, they're like clones. They look just like their loved ones, so no one knows like who is who, what to believe. There is like a sci-fi element to this, but it's extreme horror. It's messed up, it's disgusting. Absolutely love it. It explores the deep, dark side of humanity. Such a good one. Then I have Full Brutal by Christopher Triana, another extreme horror book. Obviously, I'm obsessed with this one. And in this book, you are following Kim White, who is this cheerleader, but she's obsessed with ruining people's lives. So she decides one day she's going to lose her virginity to her teacher and then ruin his life, and it leads her on this path of sadism, and she is wild. This is the most wild, insane, unhinged book I've ever read, and I am obsessed. Like, I cannot shut up about this book. I seriously just want to read nothing but this book for the rest of my life. I love it so, so much. So Yeah. Then I have Broken Dolls by McKay Watson. This is another extreme horror book. This is a lot more extreme than them, but this is a home invasion extreme horror where you are following this woman. One day there's a knock at her door. She lives alone with her daughter, and this man makes his way into the home. Very similar to the movie Funny Games. It's brutal, it's dark, bleak, depressing, it's messed up, but it made me like so invested, and I was just, my heart was like, oh, I was freaking out reading this book. Heavy, heavy, heavy trigger warnings. Please be careful reading this, but it destroyed my life, and like, that's what I look for in a book, sorry. Then I have another Christopher Triana, Gone to See the Riverman. This one we are following this woman who's obsessed with a serial killer named Edmund, and she is told, like, she's trying to be his #1 groupie, but he's in prison, and he tells her to be his #1, she has to go get this key from a chest and then deliver it to this figure in the woods known as the Riverman. So good. Not super gory or graphic or anything, but it's messed up. It's disturbing, it's gross, and I love it. Next is Tender is the Flesh by Agustina Bastarrica. This is a horror book where animal meat goes poisonous and people start factory farming other people. Like, humans are being factory farmed for meat, and everyone is like turning into a cannibal. Lots of like really great commentary, and it's done really well. It's bleak, it's just depressing, disturbing, and this one is just like a masterpiece in my head. Like, it's a masterpiece. I don't know what else to say. Next is Pretty Girls by Karen Slaughter. Karen Slaughter is one of my favorite thriller authors of all time, and this one is a thriller that handles some deep, dark, messed up themes. I mean, all of her books do, but this one was pretty messed up. So we are following these two sisters, and they are kind of on different paths in life. But one day, Claire, who is like the rich sister, her husband is murdered. And we find out that the two of them had a sister who went missing when they were younger. And there is a link to the sister who went missing and the murder of her husband. So these two things are linked, and you're starting to learn the history of this family, and there's some deep, dark stuff going on here. Really my favorite thriller of all time. I'm so obsessed with this book, and it is so good. For the Sake of by Judith Sonnet, I have books 1 and 2, so I am just including both of them wrapped up into this one. So this is a book about this woman whose daughter goes missing. And here there are these guys that run this like dark web thing where they like mess with people. They play games with people. They're like, if you want to see your loved one again, you're gonna have to do X, Y, and Z, and it gets more and more disgusting and humiliating and extreme. So you're just like following her, and she has to like do all these tasks to get her daughter back, and it's wild. It is. I was on the edge of my seat reading this book. I couldn't put it down. I was obsessed. And then the second one, you're more so following like the villains involved in the situation. I know more people like the second one more, but I like the first one more, but still I'm lumping two of them together because I think that this was so well done, and this is just one of the books that got me into extreme horror. Like, I started getting into extreme horror, and this is the one where I was like, oh my god, like, turns out I can push my limits, and I was into it. Okay, listen, I've been messed up ever since. Next is No One Rides for Free by Judith Sonnet. This is another really disgusting, messed up, extreme horror book where we're following this woman as she is driving her two college kids to college. So they're on a road trip, and this man gets into the car, and it's wild. It is so wild. It's definitely like shock value for the sake of shock value, but it does kind of explore trauma and the psychological components of that. I think that this is just so good because it's so messed up and so offensive, but like in a way where I'm like, books like this just make me love extreme horror. Like, it was so messed up. I just could not believe what I was reading. I couldn't believe it. And there's also a prequel coming out. Well, I'm pre-filming this, so by the time you see this, a prequel will be out, and I'm so excited. This is Adelaide by Genevieve Wheeler. This is a general fiction, contemporary, literary fiction. I don't know what you classify this as, but we are following this woman in her early 20s, and we find out in the beginning of the book she is depressed. She basically admits herself into a psychiatric facility, and we find out kind of like some things that have led up to her going to this hospital and admitting she needs help. The book mainly follows relationship abuse, gaslighting, that sort of thing, because we are following her throughout her early 20s when she meets this guy that she thinks is the one, and turns out he's a piece of shit. And so we are just kind of following that relationship and kind of everything that has gone on in her life leading up to present day. This is so... I cried so many times reading this book because this is so relatable to my life and a relationship and situation that I went through. And I was like, I felt like I was reading my journal or something. Like, this is so insanely relatable. Like, I was up at night, like, fully sobbing for like days reading this book. It's literally one of my favorite books ever. Ever. Next is The Push by Ashley Audrain. This is about this woman who, it's labeled as a thriller, but it's more so like a psychological drama, something of that nature. But this is about this woman who, she has a child that she doesn't feel a connection with, and then you're just kind of following her relationship with her husband and just like her depression and feelings and kind of what's going on with this child. And then she has another child that she loves and has this deep connection with, and she's constantly always comparing the two, and there's just like these situations that arise. It is very sad, very depressing, very well written. This is another book that like made me sob. But the writing was just so good. I absolutely love Ashley Audrain's writing and the way that she explores like women's issues and issues surrounding like motherhood and people that don't want to have children and postpartum depression and things of that nature, and so well done. Next is The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. This is a World War II historical fiction book. This book I read during my last endometriosis surgery, and I was obsessed. I could not put this book down. So we're following these two sisters. So you're just following like both of these sisters and their story, and how one is trying to like stand up for what she believes in and fight, and then the other one is kind of left at home with her kids. And it's just so sad. You're just following these two separate stories of what they had to go through during the war. This book is just so good, so heartfelt, so depressing, but so well written. I absolutely love Kristen Hanna, and I've been like reading a bunch of her books because I just fell in love with her writing. Sticking to the theme of depression, I have A Little Life by, what is this author's name? Anya Yanagihara. So this is about Jude, and he is, we're kind of just following him and his life story, and then he has like a couple close friends. This book is about abuse, it's about trauma, it's about all of the horrible, horrific things that he's been through throughout his entire life, and you're just kind of following his story throughout his life and like his friends and what has been going on inside this friend group. And it is so sad, like triggers galore. It's depressing. This is another book that had me up sobbing for like days and days and days. But like some of his thoughts, especially relating to depression and things of that nature, were just, they felt relatable to me in a sense. Like I didn't go through everything that this character went through, but some of his feelings and emotions were just relatable to me. So this kind of destroyed me, but the writing was beautiful. I absolutely love this book. I know a lot of people don't like it, but I'm obsessed. Next is Tuesdays with Maury. This book is the book that I read so many times throughout college and like in my early adulthood. And we are following, this is based on a true story. So we are following this guy, he's like in journalism and he's in college, outside of college, whatever. He's basically like writing this paper for journalism, whatever. And he is trying to interview one of his teachers who has ALS, and he learned, you know, he's dying. So he basically spends every Tuesday with him, interviewing him, going to his house, hanging out with him, and like helping take care of him. And he kind of learns these like life lessons along the way from someone who is actively dying. And I'm gonna cry just thinking about it. Like, I love this book so much, so much. Like, this book just like meant so much to me because I would just like read it and reread it constantly in my early adulthood because there was just so much that I pulled from that. And there was just so much, it just like helped me get by, I think. Then moving back into some horror, I have My Best Friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix. He's my favorite horror author, you guys know this. So this is set in the 80s and we are following these two besties, these two girls that are best friends, and they're in high school, and one starts acting a little weird. There's something going on with her, and we find out like her friend might have to do an exorcism on her. She might be possessed, and this is just like such a great story about friendship and like the 80s themes and references. This is just perfect. I absolutely love this book. And then another Grady Hendrix is the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. So we are following this woman who's in a book club, and there's this new guy that moves in that she like on their street, and she thinks that he might be a vampire. And she's trying to convince her friends like, hey, he's really sketchy, he might be a vampire, and everyone is gaslighting her. They're like, what is wrong with you? And next thing you know, like craziness starts happening throughout this neighborhood. Next is Violence on the Meek 1 and 2 by Stuart Bray. Another thing, I'm just lumping two books into one. So this is following this guy, Paul. This is another extreme horror, and he is basically just telling you all of the horrible things that he's done throughout his life. It's like his autobiography. So we are just following the brutal, disgusting things that he's done throughout his life. But there are little bits and pieces that are kind of humorous, and I was into it. I absolutely love this book. It's just like angry. It's just like a book for angry people. And then the second one, we're following the serial killer Lucas, and similar thing, he's just kind of telling you the horrible things that he's done, and then we're following him in present day. He's trying to find this Catholic priest where a situation happened with him and his younger brother, the priest and the brother. So he's trying to find this priest, and he's going on this like mission to find him and kill him. So that is stories 1 and 2. It is wild, it is nuts, it is depraved, and I loved them. Next is They Never Learn by Lainey Fargo. This is a thriller about this woman who she kills shitty men, like men that are just terrible people, like rapists and things of that nature. So she is on this mission to, she is a college professor, and she is just like on a mission to find and kill shitty men on the campus. And then we're also following this younger girl at this college. So you're following these two timelines. This one is just so good. The twists, the story, the meaning, I absolutely loved it. Next is Jar of Hearts by Jennifer Hillier. So this is about this woman who, her friend in high school went missing, vanished without a trace, and then they find her remains, or they found her remains near Gio, our main character's home. So she basically goes to jail for this crime, and turns out she also dated a serial killer. So there's this serial killer aspect. We don't know if he was involved. Our main character, we don't know if she was involved, but she knows the truth of what happened to her best friend. And so we are slowly getting pieces of what actually happened when they were younger, and we are slowly figuring out the truth. So it's one of those things, it's like you don't know who did what, who's guilty, who's innocent, and this one was just so good. The way that things were unraveled, I absolutely love this one. Next is Into the Wolf's Den by John Athen. This is another super graphic extreme horror book. We are following these children that get kidnapped by, there's a man in a wolf mask, a man in a pig mask. They do like snuff films. Oh my god, it is, I swear to you, this is like the book that traumatized me. Like, this is just one of those books where like I vlogged this and you can see that I was like genuinely traumatized reading this book. And we're following the dad and he's trying to get his daughters back, and it's one of those things, it's like, how far are you willing to go for your family or your loved ones? This one had me on the edge of my seat. I was crying. I was like about to throw up. It was so traumatizing. Definitely be cautious, okay? But it's just one of those things where it just scared me so much to the point where like I can't not recommend this because it did its job. It did what it was supposed to do, and like it had meaning, it had storyline, it had depth to it, and I was just thinking about it. Ugh. Anyways. Then I have another John Athen. I have Shared by Two. This is about a writer. He's an extreme horror author and he decides to take a break from writing extreme horror, and he's kind of diving into writing a fantasy series. And there's a fan of his that is not happy about that. He wants him to write extreme horror, and he is getting these threatening emails, letters, and things start getting progressively more and more crazy, wild, and it's traumatizing. So this man is a stalker, and say no more. It's like a slow build into the craziest, most insane, extreme horror ending I've ever read, and I was like, another book that had me on the edge of my seat, was so well done, and such a great psychological extreme horror book. I can't recommend this enough. Next is The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This is a contemporary historical fiction type book. So you were following this celebrity, this fictional celebrity named Evelyn Hugo, and she's kind of telling you, she's being interviewed, and she's telling you just like the story of her life, and she's had seven husbands, and so she tells you about each one and about each relationship and just kind of some of the drama and things that were going on in her life. And this was so well written. I loved like the twist, the depth, the meaning, the drama. I was like crying at one point. It was just so well written. I absolutely love this book. I think it deserves all the hype that it gets. And I felt like I was reading a real celebrity memoir. Like I felt like I could Google this person and she was real. Like the character development was just so good, and I absolutely love this one. I never talk about it on my channel, but I love it. I have The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides, another thriller. This is the first thriller that I ever read, and I fell in love with it, and I'm obsessed with it. So we are following this psychiatrist, and he works in this facility where he has this patient. She shot her husband 5 times in the face and never spoke again. So she ends up at this facility and she doesn't speak, so he is trying to get her to speak and tell her story and explain what happened, and this is so good. The twists, this is literally my favorite thriller of all time. Absolutely obsessed. Next is Pen Pal by Dathan Auerbach. This is a general horror book about this guy. He's telling you the story. It's kind of like the timeline is all over the place, but he's telling you the story about when he was in 1st grade, I think it was. They did this project where you have to like write a letter, tie it to a balloon, and then it gets sent to like a random person, and they're your pen pal, and people are getting letters back, but he's getting like weird blurry pictures and just like weird things back, and the situation gets worse and worse and worse, and more crazy, sinister things start happening. This one scared me. Like for a general horror book, I actually was kind of like freaked out reading this book, which is really hard to do for me. Like there were some scenes that just like genuinely scared me. So I absolutely love this book. It's one of my favorite horror books of all time, and I cannot recommend this enough. I know a lot of people don't like this one. I don't understand why. Next is American Psycho by Bret Easton Ellis. This book, literally wild. This is extreme horror. If you know the movie American Psycho, I'm sure you know of this book. We're following Patrick Bateman, and he is just a terrible human being, a terrible man, and we're following him with his friends and his day-to-day life, and just like reading the stuff that's inside of his head is just absolutely mind-blowing. It is insane. It like, I couldn't even believe what I was reading. But we're slowly following his descent into madness and being a psychopath, and it is wild. The ending, wild. This whole book, wild. I don't even know what else to say, but it is a masterpiece to me. It is 1984 by George Orwell. I read this in high school, still stuck with me to this day, still obsessed with it. So this is one of those dystopian society kind of books where we're following Big Brother, where it's the year 1984, and he wrote this like about the future. So you're following, like, it's the year 1984, and suddenly like Big Brother, the government is like watching everyone and controlling everything that everyone does. So it's like this whole like mind control thing in this dystopian universe, and oof, that's all I gotta say about that. Next is Killing Stalking. This is a manga, manhwa. It's like a Korean manga, manhwa. Whatever, I get them all mixed up. So this is about this boy who has a crush on this other boy, and he like kind of stalks him around a little bit, and he ends up becoming prisoner in his crush's home. Like he ends up being held captive, and this story explores abuse, trauma. It's like it's a horror story. People classify this as like romance. No. This is about abuse and trauma. It's disgusting, it's disturbing, but the things that happen, I'm just like so sucked in, and like I can't believe that this is going on. I seriously can't believe this story, but I'm almost done. I think there's like 1 or 2 more volumes coming out in the US, and then I'll be done with it. So this is just like my favorite story so far because I'm so sucked in and invested. But I couldn't not include it on this list because I think about it like all the time. And then last but not least, I have 2 nonfiction recommendations for you. The first one is Vagina Problems by Laura Parker. This is a nonfiction chronic pain memoir about endometriosis. So Laura Parker is a writer for BuzzFeed. She's super well known for like having endometriosis online because she's so open about it. And this is just like her memoir and her personal experience dealing with it. And there were so many things. I did not have a diagnosis at the time that I read this book, and I read this book and it sounded like I wrote it, and I was like, yep, I have endometriosis. And it was the thing that like really led me to push doctors into giving me a diagnosis. This is just so insanely relatable. And then the other one is Bleed, Destroying Myths and Misogyny in Endometriosis Care. So this is another nonfiction exploring the healthcare system, specifically women's healthcare and issues relating to endometriosis, finding a diagnosis, getting the appropriate care, issues with OBGYNs, issues with just the inequality of healthcare, and it is so mind-blowing but makes so much sense. Like when you go to doctors and don't get answers, and then you read this book, it's like, oh, this is why. Such a great read for anyone, really, anyone dealing with women's issues, but just anyone in general that wants to learn more about like how messed up our healthcare system is. Highly recommend. So yeah, that was it. No, I did it. I made it through. I remembered the plot of 30 books. Look at that. So yeah, those are my 30 book recommendations before I turn 30. So comment down below if you read any of these and if you liked them, and I will see you in my next video.